It is a truth seldom acknowledged in police handbooks but frequently observed in the more exclusive corners of the London clubs, that murder, when it chooses to occur, often selects for its backdrop the places least deserving of excitement. One might expect sudden death to pay its respects to gambling dens, foreign embassies, or the less reputable wings of the Savoy, but on a wet Wednesday afternoon in March, it made its debut instead at number 12 Marbury Lane, W., a house so devoid of character that even the milkman could not reliably recall whether the occupants preferred cream. The street, if one could elevate its status so generously, ran a modest course through a fog-bound sliver of Kensington, cobblestoned, irregular, and flanked with an architecture best described as late Victorian indiscretion. At number 12, the brass knocker had gone unpolished for some weeks. The curtains hung like reluctant witnesses, and the windows, those peering pane-glassed eyes, reflected nothing save the grey drizzle of the season. Lord Peter Wimsey arrived at this undistinguished address, not in pursuit of crime, but of cufflinks. "I confess," he murmured, half to his manservant Bunter, half to the mist itself, "I expected rather more from the late Mr. Gervase Fenwick's effects. He promised Mother an unparalleled trove of 16th-century curiosities. I suspect, Bunter, that he was either misinformed or a far greater liar than was ever evident during our bridge games." Bunter, whose opinions were often delivered with a discretion bordering on ecclesiastical, simply adjusted his master's collar and said, "I gather that Mr. Fenwick's solicitor had reason to believe the house had been unentered for some weeks, my lord." "Yes, yes," said Wimsey vaguely, staring at the grim facade. "Unentered by the living, I imagine. Unless, of course, you count Mrs. Harpeth, who appears to have taken up the role of neighbourhood Sibyl, seer of shadows and shrubberies." For indeed, at that moment, a thin figure with an expression like underboiled mutton appeared from the house opposite. Mrs. Harpeth, resident of number 11 and self-proclaimed guardian of Marbury Lane's spiritual hygiene, crossed the road with the urgency of one who has seen too many episodes of Blue Lamp and not enough of Macbeth. "I shouldn't go in, my lord," she said, eyes wide with confidential horror. "That house hasn't been right since Candlemas." Candlemas. Wimsey raised a brow. "A curious choice of liturgical superstition. Is it haunted by a liturgist?" "There's something wrong in the parlour, my lord. I hear a clicking, like a beetle or bones or one of those machines that count out sins." "Metronome, perhaps," said Wimsey. "Or possibly a ghost with a musical education." "Or worse," added Mrs. Harpeth grimly. "The back light's been on for a fortnight, and the blinds twitch at midnight." Wimsey thanked her with the sort of bow better suited to restoration comedy than police inquiry, and mounted the 3 steps to the front door. It was unlocked, perhaps unsurprisingly, for no self-respecting burglar would expect valuables to reside within. The air inside was dry, but not stale, the kind of dryness peculiar to vacant libraries and nervous boarding houses. Bunter flicked on the hallway light, revealing a peculiar stillness. There were no signs of intrusion, no displaced rugs, no broken china, no papers rifled in panic. Yet the house bore that unmistakable scent of after, a silence that had once been sound. "I shall proceed to the study," said Wimsey, and without waiting, opened the first door on the right. The study was dark. One drawn curtain allowed a narrow stream of watery light to catch on the edge of a mahogany writing desk. The armchair before it was pushed back slightly, and on the blotter lay a solitary glove, a curious thing of old kid leather and monogrammed embroidery. The fire had gone out weeks ago, and in the grate, tucked among the grey ashes, was something very like the burnt remains of a photograph. But most compelling of all was the curious tick. It was not a clock. It came unmistakably from the panelled wall by the bookcase. "Do you hear it, Bunter?" asked Wimsey. "Yes, my lord," said Bunter after a moment. "Mechanical, repetitive. May I suggest a concealed instrument?" "You may," said Wimsey, "though I should prefer it to be a concealed criminal. Much more stimulating." What happened next occurred with the sudden, jarring logic of bad theatre. From the stairwell above them, a crash, a sharp wooden thump, followed by a sound like marbles scattering across a tray. And then, nothing. "Perhaps," said Whimsy, his voice perfectly dry, "the ghosts are attempting a poltergeist coup d'etat." They ascended the stairs, where the second-floor landing opened into a narrow corridor of closed doors. At the far end, one lay ajar. It was the smallest bedroom, the sort reserved for visitors one didn't care to impress. The window was open, the curtains stirred, and beside the single iron-framed bed, on a polished patch of parquet, lay a body. It was male. It was middle-aged. It was, upon closer inspection, wearing a pair of evening slippers, one of which had fallen off in what must have been a spectacular and terminal loss of balance. The eyes were open, and the face, pale though it was, bore not an expression of fear or shock, but rather something altogether more unsettling. Surprise. Whimsy knelt beside the man, adjusted his monocle and tilted his head. "Well," he said cheerfully, "that explains the milk going sour, though I confess, Bunter, I had rather hoped to leave today with a pair of Elizabethan cufflinks, not a corpse in a cardigan." And with that, the mystery of Marbury Lane, of the quiet house, the ticking sound, and the man who surprised death had begun. Whimsy stood slowly, brushing a fleck of dust from his cuff as Bunter, ever discreet, moved to the window and peered out with a careful hand on the sill. Outside, the drizzle had thickened into a rain of polite insistence, the kind that made umbrellas sigh and gutters murmur. Within the little bedroom, the silence now seemed almost artificial, as if it were an actor trying too hard not to be noticed. "No blood," Whimsy murmured. "No visible wound. And yet, something about the angle of that arm." "Neck appears fractured, my lord," Bunter observed with clinical precision. "The sort of fall that might be expected from a sudden trip or a deliberate push," Whimsy finished gently, turning his gaze to the rug. It was small, threadbare in one corner, and showed the impression of recent displacement. "And yet," he continued, "no evidence of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no claw marks on the floorboards, no signs of a man fighting his fate. Curious, is it not, that death should descend so quietly on a Wednesday afternoon?" He paced the room slowly, his gloved fingers trailing along the chipped edges of a modest dresser, then pausing on the brass knob of a narrow wardrobe. He opened it. Inside, coats hung in symmetrical boredom, 4 in total, 1 tweed, 1 herringbone, and 2 lightweight woolen numbers more suitable for late spring. The scent within was dry, chalky. Somewhere in the folds, lavender struggled to maintain its ancient hold. Whimsy stepped back. "One would not expect a man of such unimpressive tailoring to host secrets, Bunter. And yet—" He knelt once more beside the corpse and studied the expression. The surprise, yes, but also a curious slackness to the mouth, the faintest upward tilt of the brows. It is rather like a man who has just recognized someone he did not expect to see. Bunter cleared his throat. "Shall I telephone Inspector Parker, my lord?" "Do. And see that the local constabulary doesn't stumble in here like a herd of enthusiastic cattle. I want the scene undisturbed until Parker arrives. And Bunter, before you go, have a look at the man's hands." They were clean, the nails short, but Whimsy noticed a small ink stain on the right index finger. Not fresh, but recent enough to suggest the habit of note-taking or correspondence. "No rings. But look here, pale indentation on the 3rd finger. A wedding band removed, perhaps. Sentimental or practical, I wonder. Something else, my lord." Bunter gestured toward the bedside table, a cheap affair with peeling veneer. A pair of wire-framed spectacles lay folded next to a copy of the Times, but beneath it, peeking out like a guilty secret, was a postcard. Whimsy slid it free. It bore no writing, only an image. An old sepia print of a chapel ruin on a hill half sunk in fog. The kind of place one might see in a railway station souvenir rack, only slightly more brooding than most. Curious, Whimsy murmured. No message, no address. Just the ruin. A chapel, possibly Norman. Look at the tower, square buttressed, sloping at the base. Not local, I think. Shall I hold on to it, my lord? Indeed. And Bunter, leave the spectacles precisely as they were. I suspect we shall need a clear view of what this gentleman last read. Whimsy turned his attention to the fireplace. It was unusually pristine. Not so much as a stray coal or a smudge of soot lingered. He took a thin-bladed knife from his pocket and gently prodded the ashes. A soft flake crumbled, revealing a fragment of photographic paper, mostly destroyed, but with enough left to show a portion of a woman's sleeve. Silk, perhaps. Something floral. And a gloved hand holding something. A glass? A cigarette? Regrettable, Whimsy muttered. Our ghost has been thorough. Downstairs, the ticking resumed. Louder now, or perhaps simply more pronounced in contrast to the room's morbid hush. Whimsy descended once more and traced the sound to its source. The panelled wall in the study, previously noted, bore a faint seam barely visible between two wooden slats. At first glance, decorative. Upon closer inspection, functional. Whimsy pressed one corner lightly, and with a click that was almost embarrassed to exist, a small square of paneling popped open to reveal a curious device, an old metronome, balanced delicately on a shelf hollowed into the wall. Well now, Whimsy said, kneeling, our ghost has rhythm. He examined it carefully. The pendulum swung with unnatural precision, set to a tempo far too fast for comfort. Perhaps allegro, if one were orchestrating a séance. Why conceal a metronome? He murmured. Unless one wished to simulate a sound at regular intervals without being seen. Bunter, does this strike you as the behavior of a gentleman in solitude? No, my lord. More the behavior of someone hoping to convince others that a room was occupied or haunted. Whimsy's eyes lit with amusement. Ah, the spectral theatre. The twitching blinds at midnight, Mrs. Harpeth's beetle-like clicking, clever if unsubtle. But to what end? No one sees a ghost without being told where to look. And the best way to direct the gaze is to build anticipation. He shut the panel gently, pausing only to glance once more at the glove left on the writing desk. One glove. Why only one? The mate nowhere in sight. Have a look about the place, he instructed Bunter. Particularly in the parlor and kitchen. See if anything appears conspicuously absent. Hats, coats, umbrellas. Our friend upstairs may have had a visitor who departed in a hurry. Bunter nodded and vanished down the corridor, his steps muffled by carpet and caution. Whimsy remained in the study, his hands behind his back, rocking slightly on his heels. His gaze turned toward the bookshelves. 3 tiers deep, neatly arranged in that way peculiar to men who read only occasionally and catalogued by color. But one book, spine cracked and title worn, lay horizontally across 2 standing volumes. He drew it out. It was a journal, leather-bound, cheap, the kind given at Christmas by uncreative aunts. The contents, however, were meticulously recorded. Receipts were tucked between pages. Grocer, tobacconist, a bill for fencing lessons dated 4 months prior. Whimsy frowned. Fencing. He flipped forward. A name appeared in the margins. Dr. J. Osterley, Tues 3 p.m. A therapist, perhaps? The handwriting was small, crabbed, impatient. Not the same hand that had addressed him in the bridge invitations from Fenwick 3 months before. Someone else's script, jotted in haste or irritation. A few pages later, another entry. D arrives, discussed chapel, refuses return. And then, underlined in heavy ink, remove evidence by end of month. At that moment, Bunter reappeared. My lord, he said quietly. The kitchen was in odd condition. One teacup, freshly rinsed but not dried. One saucer missing. No kettle on the hob, but signs the burner had been used recently. No second glove and, yes, no umbrella in the stand, but 3 pairs of boots by the back door, all dry except one. Whimsy gave a little hum of satisfaction. We shall find, I fancy, that our man had a caller. One who came in secret and left in haste. One whose visit was carefully arranged, but whose departure proved unexpectedly permanent. He tapped the metronome's panel gently. Ghosts don't knock, Bunter. They don't wear gloves, and they certainly don't forget to dry their boots. He turned, eyes alight. Let us await Inspector Parker. I rather think the game is afoot, and the ghost has a very human accomplice. Inspector Parker arrived with the punctiliousness of a man accustomed to taking control and bending circumstances to his will. His entrance was marked by a polite cough that attempted to sound authoritative but landed somewhere between a clearing of the throat and a slight wheeze. The inspector was a man of middle height, with a neat moustache that was beginning to curl upwards in the most unconvincing manner, and a forehead prematurely furrowed from long days spent wrestling with provincial criminals and village gossips. Whimsy greeted him with a slight bow, a gesture that seemed to prompt the inspector into a momentary hesitation, as if he were weighing whether to return the civility or simply press on with business. The rain had tapered off outside, leaving the lane slick and glistening, but indoors the air remained heavy with the lingering scent of damp wood and old papers. "Inspector," Whimsy began, "you have arrived just in time for the unraveling of a rather delicate mystery. Do sit, and do pardon the disarray." He gestured lightly towards the study, where the evidence had begun to accumulate in curious clusters, books disturbed, papers folded oddly, and the faint impression of footsteps in the dust on the window sill. Parker shuffled forward, removing his hat and revealing thinning hair that had once been dark, but now bore a silver sheen that caught the lamplight. "Thank you, Lord Peter. I understand the circumstances are delicate," he said, his tone suggesting both respect and a simmering impatience. "What have you found so far?" Whimsy's eyes twinkled with a mixture of mischief and gravity. "Ah, the usual dance of shadows and whispers. But before I reveal my cards, might I trouble you for a description of your own findings? We must compare notes, Inspector. The truth, after all, has a most inconvenient habit of revealing itself only when all sides have been considered." The inspector nodded briskly. "The deceased, one Mr. Henry Armitage, was found in his bedroom, apparently the victim of a fall. However, given the circumstances, I share your suspicion that this was no accident. The broken neck is consistent with a sudden, forceful movement. Likely a push." "Indeed," Whimsy agreed. Yet the room bore no sign of struggle. No overturned furniture, no marks to suggest a fight. Rather odd for a murder committed so abruptly, wouldn't you say? "Quite, which is why I've taken statements from the household and neighbors." "Excellent. Any suspects?" Whimsy inquired, lighting a cigar with deliberate slowness. "Several, actually." Parker settled into a chair and cleared his throat. "Firstly, there is Miss Evelyn Armitage, the niece of the deceased. A young woman of considerable charm, but apparently somewhat at odds with her uncle over the family estate. Then Mr. Charles Fenwick, a solicitor with vested interests and known for his short temper. And finally, the household butler, Mr. Grimsby, whose loyalty seems to have faltered of late." Whimsy took a thoughtful puff. "A trifecta of motives. Love, money, and resentment. The usual suspects in such affairs. Have you noticed anything amiss in their testimonies?" The inspector nodded. "Miss Evelyn insists she was out visiting friends at the time of death, but no one can verify her whereabouts. Mr. Fenwick claims he was in London all day, though there's some doubt about his travel arrangements. As for Grimsby, he appears cagey about the movements within the house, particularly concerning the hour before the discovery." Whimsy tapped ash into the tray and stood. "The devil, it seems, is in the details." "Indeed," Parker replied. Whimsy moved towards the window, gazing out at the wet cobbles. "Tell me, Inspector, what of the clock in the hall?" "The one by the staircase?" Parker queried. "Yes. Does it keep accurate time?" "Generally, yes, though it has been known to run a little fast." "Precisely," Whimsy said. "The question is, how fast, and by how much?" Parker shrugged. "I haven't measured it." Whimsy turned back to the room and pulled from his pocket a small notebook. "I have. 10 minutes fast, which, when considering alibis and time-sensitive statements, is rather crucial. For example, if Miss Evelyn claims to have left at 4 o'clock, which clock does she mean? The hall clock? The mantel clock in her room? Time is a slippery fish, Inspector, and one that can be most inconveniently misreported." Parker looked mildly impressed. "I see your point." "Good. Now, the metronome I discovered concealed behind a panel," Whimsy continued, "was ticking at a tempo that could mask the sound of a door opening or closing. A soundproof door, if you will. Have you noted any doors in the house that seem less ordinary?" The inspector frowned. "Well, the door to the servants' quarters has always been a little creaky, but soundproof? I can't say." Whimsy smiled faintly. "No, not the servants' door. The one between the study and the stairwell, hidden behind a tapestry. It is fitted with a solid core, considerably heavier than most. A soundproof door." "Why would one have such a door there?" Parker mused. "To conceal," Whimsy said, "or to protect, or perhaps to allow comings and goings unnoticed." The inspector nodded slowly. "I will have my men inspect it." "Excellent." Whimsy's eyes narrowed slightly. "Now, you mentioned a missing glove upstairs." "Yes. Only one found on the writing desk, the other nowhere to be seen." Whimsy rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "A single glove can be a powerful symbol, of haste, of concealment, or of a hurried departure. I suspect the wearer was interrupted, perhaps forced to flee unexpectedly." "Are you suggesting the murderer was someone Mr. Armitage knew and trusted?" "Not merely trusted, but expected. The missing glove may indicate that the visitor did not intend to stay long." Parker straightened. "Tell me, Lord Peter, what do you make of the postcard found among Mr. Armitage's belongings? The chapel ruin?" "A splendid question, Inspector." Whimsy produced the card and handed it over. "It is clearly not a casual memento. No message, no address. A deliberate symbol. The ruins depicted are those of St. Cyprian's Chapel, a site with a history of clandestine meetings and, some say, ghosts." "Ghosts?" Parker's brow furrowed. Whimsy shrugged. "Superstition, mostly. But the chapel's ruin has become a rendezvous point for those who prefer discretion. I believe Mr. Armitage was involved in something quite secretive, perhaps meetings away from prying eyes." Parker looked intrigued. "So the victim had secrets?" "Indeed, and secrets are often the motive for murder." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Bunter, who bore a small bundle of papers. "My lord, these were found tucked beneath the loose floorboard in the study. Some appear to be correspondence, others are notes, written hastily." Whimsy accepted the papers, quickly scanning them. They spoke of debts, threats, and a mysterious appointment at the chapel. Ruin. One letter, unsigned, warned Mr. Armitage to cease meddling or face consequences. "Ah, threats," Whimsy murmured. "One might call them a red herring, but often they lead us true." Parker looked up sharply. "Is it not strange that such correspondence was hidden here, yet the man was found in his room, ostensibly alone?" "More than strange. It is a clue, a suggestion that the victim expected danger, yet was caught unprepared." He folded the papers carefully. "Inspector, I propose we visit this chapel ruin without delay. There may lie the key to understanding not just the death, but the tangled web of relationships around Mr. Armitage." Parker agreed, and after brief preparations, the two men departed the house, leaving the mysteries and shadows behind. As the mist began to gather thickly along the lanes of Marbury, Whimsy glanced back once, his mind already racing through timelines, motives, and the ticking of clocks. The game, he thought, was indeed afoot, and the pieces were beginning to show their true shape. The journey to St. Cyprian's Chapel was marked by an unsettling quiet, broken only by the soft crunch of gravel beneath their boots and the occasional hoot of a distant owl. The countryside around Marbury had slipped into a gloaming mist, a pale veil that blurred the hedgerows and lent a spectral aspect to the gnarled oaks lining the narrow lane. Whimsy, for all his urbane ease, seemed momentarily drawn into the gloom, his sharp gaze scanning the landscape as though expecting it to divulge a secret in its silences. "Curious, is it not," Whimsy murmured, "that such a ruin should command such whispered significance? I imagine few visitors come here by daylight, let alone at dusk." Inspector Parker, less given to flights of fancy, grunted assent. "Old churches have a habit of attracting superstition, particularly when they fall to ruin. But we must remember, our interest is in fact not folklore." "Of course," Whimsy replied, "yet even facts wear the guise of myth when seen through the eyes of those who cling to shadows." They crossed a small stile and approached the chapel, its broken archway framing a jagged silhouette against the fading light. Ivy clawed at the crumbling stones, and inside, the remains of stained glass cast faint kaleidoscopic hues upon the weeds and moss-covered altar. Whimsy crouched to inspect the ground. "Observe the footprints here," he said, gesturing to a shallow impression in the damp earth. "Fresh, though muddied by the recent rain. A hurried visitor, or one who wished to be unnoticed." Parker stooped beside him, tracing the tracks with a gloved finger. "Too large for Miss Evelyn, I should say." "No, I would think not." Whimsy's lips twitched in a faint smile. "And yet, size alone cannot confirm identity, nor can direction alone confirm innocence." They rose and ventured further into the shadowed interior, the silence almost oppressive. "Do you detect it, Inspector?" Whimsy asked softly. The faint scent of lavender mingled with something harsher, a metallic tang, perhaps. Parker wrinkled his nose. "Yes, I do. Lavender is common enough in this part, but the metallic undertone is curious. Indeed. It suggests the presence of something less natural than herbs. Blood, perhaps, or rusted iron." Parker glanced about, his unease growing. "Should we not alert the constabulary to search here more thoroughly?" Whimsy nodded. "We shall, but first, a careful examination." His eyes landed on a cluster of ragged stones near the altar. One in particular was out of place, newer, less weathered. "An attempt to conceal something or a recent disturbance," Whimsy mused, pressing a gloved hand against the stone. It shifted slightly under his touch. With a sharp glance at Parker, he crouched and carefully levered the stone aside, revealing a shallow cavity beneath. Within lay a folded scrap of parchment, damp and crumpled, but legible. Whimsy unfolded it with delicate care. The note read, "To those who seek truth beneath the stones, beware the eyes that watch and the tongues that whisper lies." "Cryptic," Parker remarked, frowning. "A warning?" "More likely a message meant to deter prying eyes," Whimsy suggested. "But such warnings often serve only to deepen one's curiosity." He replaced the stone and pocketed the note, then turned to examine the chapel's broken windows. "Notice how the fragments of glass have been arranged to obscure vision from the outside, yet allow light in. A careful hand or a careless vandal?" "Whoever did it," Parker said, "knew exactly what they were about." They made their way back to the lane, footsteps muffled by the encroaching fog. "Tell me, Inspector," Whimsy began, "what of the household staff? Have their statements been consistent regarding their whereabouts and observations?" Parker sighed. "Most profess ignorance, as is their wont. But there is a peculiar detail. Grimsby, the butler, claims to have heard the church bell toll at midnight on the night of the murder. Yet the local vicar assures me the bell has been silent for years. Whimsy arched an eyebrow. A phantom bell, how delightfully Gothic. Perhaps a trick of the mind or a signal between conspirators, Parker speculated. Or a deliberate deception, Whimsy said. It warrants further inquiry. Bells are difficult to fake, yet easy to imagine when one is predisposed. Their conversation was interrupted by the sudden appearance of a figure on the lane ahead, a woman, cloaked and hooded, stepping briskly through the mist. "Miss Evelyn," Parker greeted her with a formal nod. "You're out late." She inclined her head, eyes sharp beneath her hood. "I find the night more truthful than the day, Inspector, and far less burdened by polite pretense." Whimsy stepped forward, offering a slight smile. "Miss Armitage, your penchant for nocturnal wanderings has not escaped our notice. Pray, what secrets does the night reveal to you?" She met his gaze evenly. "Only that appearances deceive, and that those who ask too many questions often find answers they regret." "Wise words," Whimsy said dryly. "Yet in our line of inquiry, regret is a small price for enlightenment." Evelyn's eyes flicked to Parker, then back to Whimsy. "I came to St. Cyprian's to pay my respects. Uncle Henry had his demons here, or so he claimed." "Demons, you say?" Whimsy mused, a shadow crossing his face. "Do tell." "He believed the chapel held memories too painful to bear in the daylight, that its stones whispered secrets no one dared hear. I suspect he sought refuge here from his own conscience." Whimsy's lips tightened. Such confessions are often the harbingers of confession to come. Evelyn glanced away, then back again. "There is more. Uncle Henry was planning to confront someone at the chapel the night he died. Someone from his past." "Any idea who?" Parker asked. She hesitated. "No, but I believe the note found in the study, the one warning him, was connected to that meeting." Whimsy folded his arms thoughtfully. "Then our next step is clear. We must discover who had the strongest motive to silence Mr. Armitage before his secret could emerge." The fog thickened, swallowing the lane and the chapel behind them as the three figures parted ways, each carrying their own fragment of the puzzle, their footsteps echoing faintly in the gathering gloom. Back at Marbury Hall, the atmosphere had shifted. The servants moved with a newfound wariness, and the household seemed to breathe with cautious anticipation. Whimsy returned to the study, now dimly lit by a flickering fire, and sat to consider the fragments laid before him. The torn glove, the cryptic note, the suspicious, soundproof door. A knock at the door announced Bunter's entrance, bearing a small, leather-bound notebook found in the victim's desk. "Anything of interest, Bunter?" Whimsy asked, without looking up. The butler placed the notebook on the desk. "It contains diary entries, my lord. Most are mundane, but the last few hint at growing anxiety and references to the shadow." Whimsy's fingers traced the leather. The shadow. A figure, a metaphor, or perhaps a code name. He opened the book to the final entry, dated the day before the murder. The shadow lengthens. He watches still, unseen but relentless. I must act before the hour strikes. Whimsy's eyes narrowed. A man hunted by ghosts, real or imagined. But every ghost has a face, and every shadow a source of light. "Shall we call for Miss Evelyn again?" Parker asked from the doorway. Indeed. It is time to unravel the threads of pretense, to compel those who hide behind shadows to step into the light. The investigation was gathering momentum, the quiet village of Marbury poised on the cusp of revelation. Whimsy's mind raced ahead, piecing together the tapestry of motives, lies, and half-truths that clung to the edges of this dark puzzle. And somewhere, hidden among the ruins of chapel and conscience alike, lay the key to a murder both subtle and cruel. The afternoon light, filtered through heavy curtains of deep burgundy, lay thick upon the polished wood of the drawing-room table where Miss Evelyn Armitage sat, her fingers lightly touching the rim of a teacup. The faint clink of porcelain punctuated the otherwise measured silence, broken only by the occasional crackle from the dying fire. Lord Peter Wimsey leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin, his sharp gaze fixed upon the young woman whose composure belied the turmoil that simmered just beneath. "Miss Armitage," Wimsey began, his voice deliberately measured, "you spoke yesterday of a meeting your late uncle intended at St. Cyprian's Chapel, the night of his death, no less. Might I trouble you to recount with particular precision what you know of this appointment?" Evelyn hesitated, the faintest flicker of unease crossing her features. "I'm afraid it is little more than supposition, Lord Peter. Uncle Henry was secretive, and his journals are fragmentary at best, but he had been receiving letters, threatening, cryptic over the past fortnight. He refused to show them to anyone, yet the anxiety they caused was evident." "A fascinating detail," Wimsey murmured. "And these letters? Have you or anyone else been able to retrieve one?" She shook her head. "No. He tore them up after reading, but I believe some fragments remain, hidden in the study. I have not dared to search there since his death." Wimsey's lips curled in a faint, knowing smile. "The study often holds more than books and papers, Miss Armitage. Might I suggest a visit?" Before she could respond, Inspector Parker entered, carrying a modest bundle of papers. "My lord, the local postmaster has handed these over. Copies of the correspondence your uncle sent and received over the last month." Wimsey's eyes lit with interest as he unfolded the neatly typed pages. "Ah, excellent. Let us see what shadows our victim cast in ink." They pored over the letters, an exchange marked by increasing tension. Henry Armitage wrote cautiously, appealing for discretion and peace. His correspondent's replies were curt, laced with thinly veiled threats and warnings to desist from some unspecified pursuit. The final letter, unsigned but unmistakably penned by the same hand, was particularly chilling. "Your time wanes, and silence is the only path left to you." Clearly, our Henry was entangled in matters most delicate, Wimsey remarked. "But what, pray tell, was he so anxious to keep from the light of day?" "Your thoughts, my lord?" Parker inquired. Wimsey tapped a slender finger against his temple. "One must consider the psychological subtext. The language of menace implies not merely fear, but a sense of guilt or concealment. I am reminded of Shakespeare's words, 'The lady doth protest too much, methinks.' A man threatened so does not always prove innocent." Evelyn paled. "You suggest Uncle Henry might have been involved in something unsavory?" "Not necessarily unsavory, but certainly troubling," Wimsey replied. "May I ask about the household itself? You mentioned the servants were tight-lipped." "Yes, most seem unwilling to discuss the matter, fearing scandal or repercussions, though the butler, Grimsby, has been a constant presence in the house for decades." "Grimsby?" Wimsey echoed, eyes narrowing. "A long tenure in service often breeds intimate knowledge, and occasionally a steadfast loyalty that blinds its holder to truth." "Indeed," Parker said. "I have spoken with Grimsby. He insists on his innocence, but admits to hearing strange noises on the night in question, footsteps near the chapel, a muffled voice, and the bell tolling, which, as I mentioned before, should not have rung." "A spectral bell toll," Wimsey mused, "an echo of guilt or an orchestrated deception?" The young woman's fingers twitched anxiously. Could it be someone trying to frighten the household? Uncle Henry was prone to believing in curses and superstition. "Ah, superstition. A fertile ground for misdirection," Wimsey agreed. "Yet I find it difficult to accept that a man so practical would be cowed by such nonsense, especially when faced with real threats." He rose and moved toward the window, pulling aside the curtain. Outside, the sky was now dappled with the faint pink of approaching dusk, the shadows lengthening and swallowing the day's clarity. "We must examine the timing of events more closely. The study was locked the night of the murder, yes?" "Yes," Evelyn confirmed. "Only Uncle Henry and Grimsby held keys. Then we shall require to speak with Grimsby again. Wimsey's gaze settled on Parker. There is merit in questioning the loyalties of those closest to the victim, especially when they control access to critical spaces. The butler was summoned without delay. He appeared shortly, immaculate and reserved, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of apprehension as Wimsey began his inquiry. "Mr. Grimsby, I'm told you heard the bell tolling at midnight, which is rather puzzling given the bell's silence for many years. Might you explain?" Grimsby cleared his throat. "My lord, I swear I heard it with my own ears. I thought it might be a trick of the night at first, but then I heard footsteps near the chapel. Someone moving quickly, as if in great haste." "Did you attempt to investigate?" Wimsey asked. "No, sir. I feared for my safety and chose to observe from the doorway." Wimsey's eyes narrowed. "A prudent choice, or one that spared you from witnessing more?" The butler's steady gaze wavered. "I do not know, my lord." "Tell me, Grimsby, were you ever close to Mr. Armitage? Familiar enough to notice if he acted strangely in the days before his death?" "Sir, I have served this family for over 30 years. I knew Mr. Armitage well enough to know when something was amiss. And yes, he was more withdrawn, often restless, and spoke little. He spent long hours at the chapel in the evenings." "Alone?" "Not always. He met someone there, or so I was told." "Who might that have been?" Grimsby hesitated. "I do not know. Mr. Armitage was secretive about his visitor's identity." Wimsey regarded the butler thoughtfully. "Thank you, Mr. Grimsby. One final question. Did you ever see or hear of anyone else with access to the chapel?" "The vicar, of course," Grimsby replied, though his visits were infrequent and announced. Wimsey nodded. "Then we must speak with Reverend Matthews at our earliest convenience." As the butler withdrew, Wimsey turned to Evelyn. "You mentioned that your uncle was haunted by the shadow. Might that be a metaphor for a person rather than a state of mind?" "Perhaps," she admitted. "There was a man, an old friend, or so Uncle Henry called him, who disappeared from the village years ago under a cloud of suspicion. Do you know his name?" "Giles Holbrook. He left abruptly after an accusation of embezzlement, though nothing was ever proven." "A shadow indeed. Absent but lingering, like a stain on a treasured garment." Wimsey smiled thinly. "It is remarkable how often the past returns to claim its due." He consulted his watch. "It would be wise to visit Reverend Matthews before dusk fades entirely. The vicar may illuminate our shadows." The trio set off, the chill of evening settling over Marbury as they crossed the village square, passing curious faces shuttered behind lace curtains. Reverend Matthews greeted them at the vicarage with a mixture of curiosity and guarded civility. His clerical collar seemed as stiff as his manner. "Lord Peter Wimsey," he said, inclining his head, "your reputation precedes you. How may I assist in these troubling times?" Wimsey wasted no time. "Reverend, we understand that your visits to St. Cyprian's have been sporadic, yet you maintain the only other key besides Mr. Armitage and the household staff. Might I ask about your relationship with the deceased?" Matthews shifted uneasily. "Mr. Armitage was a complex man. Our relationship was cordial but distant. He was troubled, often retreating into himself. I did not see him the night he died." "Were you aware of his secret visitor at the chapel?" "I had heard whispers," Matthews admitted. "Giles Holbrook, perhaps. I cannot say for certain." "Mr. Holbrook," Wimsey mused aloud, "a man with a shadowy past and possible motive." The Reverend nodded grimly. "He disappeared years ago, but the villagers say he might return. A stain on this quiet place." Wimsey's gaze hardened. "Then our path is clearer. We must uncover Mr. Holbrook's whereabouts and determine if his shadow stretched to Marbury on the night of the murder." The Reverend offered a faint, weary smile. "May God guide you, Lord Peter." As they departed the vicarage, the dusk had deepened to twilight, and the village seemed to hold its breath. The threads of deceit and fear were gathering into a tightening noose. Whimsy's mind raced, fitting the pieces of the puzzle into place. Cryptic letters, secret meetings, spectral bells, and shadows cast long and dark. Yet the truth remained elusive, waiting in the half-light to be drawn fully into the glare of reason. The days following their meeting with Reverend Matthews passed in a succession of grey skies and rain-soaked streets that seemed to echo the mood enveloping Marbury. The village had slipped further under a veil of whispered conjectures and furtive glances, as though the very air were charged with the weight of unspoken truths. Lord Peter Wimsey, however, remained his usual imperturbable self, navigating this suffocating atmosphere with the precision of a conductor leading a symphony of subtleties. One morning, as he paced the modest study of Marbury House, his thoughts coalesced into a pattern that demanded investigation beyond the obvious. He had been poring over the letters again, tracing the jagged edges of the correspondence with a practiced eye, when Parker entered, bringing news that would soon pivot the entire inquiry. "Lord Peter," Parker said, setting down a folded newspaper clipping, "we have word from the neighboring parish of Little Sedge Combe. A man answering Giles Halbrook's description was seen in the vicinity just last week." Wimsey raised a single, elegantly arched eyebrow. "That is most intriguing, Inspector. Pray, was this gentleman conducting a charity bazaar or engaged in less wholesome pursuits?" "Neither, my lord. Witnesses describe him as furtive, moving quickly and avoiding company. A striking figure, much like the photos we found among Armitage's papers." The detective stepped closer, reading the account aloud. A man of sharp features, marked by a faint scar above his left eyebrow, said to have lingered near the old mill at twilight. He folded the paper carefully. "The mill, a relic of Marbury's more industrious past, now a refuge for the village's shadows. It appears our ghost is no mere figment of superstition." "But what does this mean for our investigation?" Evelyn asked, joining them. Her voice carried a note of weary hopefulness. "It means, Miss Armitage, that the shadows of the past have not yet relinquished their hold. Giles Halbrook's return may well explain the threatening letters and the secret meetings. But the question remains. Why did your uncle meet him at St. Cyprian's? What secrets were bartered beneath the cold stone? The trio set out to explore the mill, a crumbling edifice perched on the edge of the village brook. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and rust, the silence punctuated only by the slow drip of water seeping through fractured panes. Wimsey's sharp eyes surveyed every detail, the way the broken windows tilted askew, the scuff marks on the wooden floorboards, the remnants of old tools scattered about as though abandoned in haste. "Observe," he murmured, pointing to a narrow gap in the floor near the base of a rotted beam. A hidden compartment, perhaps. With some effort, the loose board was pried back, revealing a leather-bound journal, its edges worn and pages yellowed. Wimsey carefully opened it, scanning the faded ink. "An unexpected find," he remarked. "This appears to be Mr. Halbrook's diary." Evelyn's fingers trembled as she reached out. "May I?" "By all means." Wimsey's voice held a quiet authority, inviting but insistent. The entries detailed Halbrook's descent from a promising accountant to a man consumed by desperation. Accusations of embezzlement, betrayal by a close friend, and a mounting vendetta against those he believed had wronged him. A series of coded references hinted at a secret shared with Henry Armitage, a matter that must never see the light of day. "Here lies our motive," Wimsey said softly. "Revenge intertwined with fear." As they studied the journal, the village clock began its measured toll, each chime a reminder of the relentless march of time. The pieces were falling into place, yet the puzzle was far from complete. Returning to Marbury House, Wimsey sought an audience with Grimsby, the loyal butler whose silence had been a persistent obstacle. "Mr. Grimsby," Wimsey began, "I trust you will forgive my candor, but your devotion to the late Mr. Armitage has been most admirable. Yet loyalty is no barrier to truth, is it?" Grimsby's eyes remained steady, but his knuckles tightened as he gripped the armrest. "Lord Peter, I have only ever sought to protect the family's honor. And yet, honor often demands uncomfortable reckonings." Wimsey paused. "Were you aware of Mr. Armitage's dealings with Mr. Holbrook?" The butler swallowed. "Yes, they had a history, but the master wished it kept quiet." "Understandably. But did you know that on the night of the murder, someone else might have had access to the chapel? A duplicate key, perhaps?" Grimsby's composure cracked for the briefest moment. "No one else, my lord." Wimsey's gaze sharpened. "Is that so? Because Miss Armitage mentioned that some letters were destroyed after reading. Might a duplicate key have facilitated their removal?" A long silence filled the room, broken only by the ticking of the ancient clock. Grimsby's shoulders sagged as he finally confessed. "There was a second key. I gave it to Miss Evelyn. She asked for it weeks ago, claiming she wished to sort through her uncle's papers." Evelyn's eyes widened in surprise. "I did, but only to protect the family from scandal." Wimsey nodded thoughtfully. "A prudent precaution, no doubt. Yet I must remind you both that such secrets have a way of ensnaring even the best of intentions." The investigation's locus shifted to Evelyn herself, as her movements and motivations came under renewed scrutiny. Her calm veneer masked a maelstrom of conflicting emotions: grief, guilt, and an unspoken urgency. "Miss Armitage," Wimsey said gently, "you have shown commendable discretion, but I must ask, did you encounter anyone at the chapel on the night of your uncle's death?" She hesitated, then confessed, "I did. Giles Holbrook confronted me there. He demanded papers, threatened to expose my uncle's past." "And what of the bell, the tolling that night?" Evelyn's voice dropped. "I rang it to summon help. I feared for my safety." Wimsey smiled faintly. The spectral bell is not so supernatural after all. Rather, a desperate call in the dark. The threads tangled further still when Wimsey received a telegram from Scotland Yard. Results from the forensic examination of the chapel floor revealed traces of a rare soil found only near the mill. This confirmed that someone had hurried between the two locations in the dead of night. The detective's mind worked with relentless clarity. If Holbrook was at the mill, then met Miss Armitage at the chapel, and yet the murder occurred there, the timeline must be examined with precision. He gathered the household once more, pressing each individual on their whereabouts during the crucial hours. The vicar's alibi was solid. The butler's movements, though close to the scene, were restricted by his duties. Evelyn's presence at the chapel was confirmed, but the murder took place minutes after her departure. Holbrook's presence was unaccounted for, yet his footprints were found by the mill. Wimsey stood, addressing the assembly with characteristic irony. "It seems our villain enjoys a dramatic flair, slipping between shadows and corners like a character from one of Shakespeare's comedies of errors, only with far graver consequences." He turned to Parker. "I suggest we prepare for a nocturnal vigil at the chapel. If our suspect is to be caught, it will be under the cloak of night and in the company of silence." The night that followed was steeped in thick fog that clung to the earth like a shroud. Wimsey and Parker concealed themselves in the shadows of the chapel ruins, awaiting the inevitable. Hours passed with only the wind and distant church bells for company, until a faint silhouette emerged from the gloom, deliberate, cautious, yet burdened with urgency. Wimsey's breath caught as the figure approached the chapel's broken door. In a swift motion, the detective stepped forward, revealing himself with a quiet authority that brooked no argument. "Mr. Holbrook, or should I say, Mr. Giles, you are quite far from the shadows you seek to hide in." The man halted, startled but not frightened, his face etched with weariness and defiance. "Lord Peter Wimsey," he replied with a dry laugh. "I wondered when you would come for me." The trap had been set, the game progressing to its inevitable conclusion. The intricate dance of secrets, lies, and human frailty was poised to unravel before the keen intellect that never missed a step. The fog swirled thickly around the chapel ruins as Giles Halbrook regarded Lord Peter Wimsey with a mixture of resignation and bitterness. The quiet of the night was punctuated only by the steady ticking of the old village clock in the distance, its sonorous chimes marking the relentless passage of time, a time now running out for the man before them. "Lord Peter," Halbrook began, voice low but steady, "I had hoped to avoid this farce, but I see it is not to be." Wimsey inclined his head, his expression a study in polite detachment. "Indeed, Mr. Halbrook, the night has a way of forcing truth from the most reluctant lips. Pray, what say you to the charges that hang over you like a noose?" Halbrook's gaze darkened. "I am no murderer. Yes, I returned to Marbury, to confront my past and seek reparation, but I did not kill Henry Armitage. That, my lord, is a crime that stinks of deceit far deeper than my own grudges." The detective's eyes narrowed slightly. "Deceit is a potent poison, Mr. Halbrook, yet facts are more resilient. You were seen near the old mill, your footprints found by the chapel, your threats recorded in the torn letters. You have motive, means, and opportunity." Halbrook's jaw clenched. "Motive and opportunity, perhaps, but you mistake my anger for murderous intent." Wimsey allowed himself a faint smile. "Ah, but anger is often the mask of more complex motives. Tell me then, what of the strange discrepancy in the timeline? You were spotted near the mill at precisely 9:15, yet the fatal blow was struck between 9 and 9:10. A shadow flickered across Halbrook's face, but he remained composed. "I was nowhere near the chapel at that time. The soil on my boots could have been picked up earlier. But your presence at the chapel minutes later is unaccounted for, is it not?" Wimsey pressed. Halbrook's eyes shifted briefly to the ruins. "Yes. I approached later, but only to plead for a final conversation. I sought to persuade him to clear my name." Wimsey's tone turned slightly more incisive. "And yet the evidence suggests that someone used your presence as a convenient alibi. A clever ruse involving misdirection and manipulation of clocks and doors." Halbrook's face betrayed a flicker of recognition, but he said nothing. "It appears, Mr. Halbrook, that the true murderer is one who understands the nuances of timing and psychology, a master of obfuscation who wove a narrative to ensnare you." Halbrook's shoulders slumped, as if the weight of unseen chains pressed upon him. "Then who?" Wimsey gestured toward the village in the distance. "That I intend to uncover. But first, there remains a detail that has long puzzled me." He produced from his pocket a small, tarnished silver salver. "This was reported missing from Marbury House on the night of the murder, yet it was found inexplicably beneath the floorboards in the chapel." Halbrook stared. That was impossible." "Nothing is impossible with the right knowledge," Wimsey said, eyes gleaming. "The salver's concealment points to an inside job, someone with intimate knowledge of the house and its secrets." The detective's mind raced through the possibilities. Evelyn Armitage's proximity to the chapel and her possession of a duplicate key, Grimsby's sudden confession, the vicar's tight alibi, and now this mysterious salver, all threads in a tangled web. Wimsey turned to Parker, who stood nearby, noting every exchange with clinical precision. "I believe our next step lies in a closer examination of the house itself." At dawn, they returned to Marbury House, its stately facade dampened by early morning mist. Wimsey moved through the rooms with the practiced eye of a man accustomed to reading the stories buildings tell. The faint impressions on carpeted floors, the subtle misalignment of door handles, the dust disturbed where it ought not be. In the drawing room, he paused before a heavy oak cabinet. "Observe, Parker," he said, running his fingers along the edges. "The wear here is uneven. Someone has been here frequently, but with care, almost reverence." Inside, beneath a false bottom, they found a bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon. Wimsey untied them carefully, revealing a correspondence between Henry Armitage and an unknown recipient, laden with cryptic references to debts and threats. One letter in particular caught his eye. Dated just days before the murder, it spoke of a final reckoning and warned of dire consequences should the recipient fail to comply. Wimsey's brow furrowed. It seems the victim's secrets extended beyond the familiar grudge with Mr. Halbrook. Evelyn, who had accompanied them, appeared pale. I never knew about this. Few did, Miss Armitage. The skeletons we hide often wait patiently for the right moment to rattle their cages. Wimsey's gaze drifted to a portrait of Henry Armitage hanging above the fireplace. The man's stern visage now seemed tinged with shadows deeper than mere age. Later, in the library, Wimsey examined the clocks. The grand-grandfather's clock in the hall, the mantelpiece timepiece, and the cuckoo clock in the servants' quarters. Each had been deliberately adjusted to create confusion. An ingenious ploy to muddle the timeline, Wimsey mused. Who, though, would have the knowledge and motive to orchestrate such a deception? Parker offered a suggestion. Perhaps someone who spent time in the house both as servant and confidant. Grimsby's presence suddenly loomed in Wimsey's mind, his knowledge of the household's inner workings, his loyalty veiling potential resentment. Wimsey resolved to speak with him again, this time with renewed focus. As evening fell, the detective found himself once more in the servants' quarters, where Grimsby awaited with an air of reluctant acceptance. "My lord," Grimsby began, "I confess the last days have been difficult. I wished only to shield the family from scandal, but perhaps I've only deepened the wounds." "Your intentions are clear, Mr. Grimsby," Wimsey replied. "But truth, like light, finds a way into the darkest corners." He paused, then leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, did you notice anyone acting peculiarly on the night of the murder? A visitor, perhaps? Or a change in the usual routine?" Grimsby hesitated, then said, "There was someone. Miss Armitage's cousin, a Mr. Philip Stanton. He arrived unexpectedly and asked to see her privately. I found it odd, as he had been absent for months abroad." Wimsey's interest piqued. "And where was Mr. Stanton during the critical hours?" "I cannot say. He retired early, saying he was unwell." Curious indeed. Wimsey nodded thoughtfully. That night, after the household had retired, Wimsey and Parker quietly investigated Philip Stanton's room. It was Spartan, yet contained a small collection of papers and a broken wristwatch, stopped at 9:07. Wimsey's eyes glittered. A clue inadvertently left behind. He inspected the papers. Bank statements, letters, and a telegram indicating financial distress and urgent demands for repayment. This man, too, had reasons to resent Henry Armitage, Wimsey concluded. The pieces were falling into place. Multiple motives, overlapping alibis, and the careful manipulation of time and space to mask a deadly secret. Wimsey turned to Parker with a faint smile. "We stand at the cusp of revelation, my dear Parker. Soon the fog that has clouded Marbury will lift, and the truth will emerge, clear and unmistakable as dawn's first light." As the night deepened, the village lay quiet. But within the walls of Marbury House, the final act was beginning to stir. The night had grown chillier, and the mist clung stubbornly to the edges of Marbury House, as if reluctant to let go of the secrets it had swallowed. Lord Peter Wimsey sat by the library fire, the flickering flames casting an erratic light on his contemplative face. Parker stood by the window, his posture alert yet subdued, a silent sentinel awaiting the moment the case might finally unravel. Wimsey's thoughts returned to the incongruities they had uncovered. The deliberately altered clocks, the missing salver discovered beneath the chapel floorboards, the cryptic letters hinting at debts and betrayals. Each clue, like a single note in a symphony, now began to coalesce into a pattern discernible only to the mind trained to listen closely. "Parker," Wimsey murmured, "it strikes me that the manipulation of time was not merely to confuse the investigation, but to mask the presence of a second hand, an accomplice who moved unseen beneath the surface. Parker nodded thoughtfully. The adjustment of clocks, the staggered alibis. But whose hand could move with such precision and remain so inconspicuous? Ah, therein lies the rub. Whimsy steepled his fingers, eyes narrowing as he recalled every interview, every detail gleaned from servants and family alike. Consider, if you will, the intimate knowledge required. Someone with unfettered access to the house and its occupants, and a motive potent enough to inspire such elaborate deceit. His gaze drifted toward the portrait of Henry Armitage, whose somber eyes seemed to watch their every move. And Parker, let us not forget the psychology at play here. The murderer must possess a certain audacity, tempered with patience and cunning, someone who sees themselves above reproach, capable of wearing the mask of innocence with aplomb. As dawn threatened the horizon with a pale promise, Whimsy's reflections were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Evelyn Armitage entered hesitantly, her expression a mixture of weariness and resolve. "My lord," she said quietly, "I have thought much upon your inquiries, and there is something I have withheld, something that might shed light on these tangled events." Whimsy inclined his head encouragingly. "Please, Miss Armitage, your candor is most welcome at this juncture." She took a seat beside the fire, clasping her hands tightly. Philip Stanton's return was more troubling than I first realized. Before his departure months ago, he and my father had a fierce quarrel. I feared his visit would only inflame old wounds, yet I confess I did not anticipate what unfolded. "Indeed," Whimsy prompted, voice measured but eager. "There is a key," she said, drawing a small, ornate item from her pocket. "A key to the private study, one my father kept secret. Philip claimed he had been entrusted with it, but when he returned, I found it missing. I suspect he sought to seize documents or correspondence my father wished hidden." Whimsy took the key, examining it closely. "Curious. And where might this study be located?" "In the west wing, behind the drawing room. The door is soundproofed. My father was a man of many secrets." A flicker of interest passed over Whimsy's face. "Soundproofed, you say? That detail may explain the oddities in the timeline and the absence of audible disturbances." He rose, motioning Parker to accompany him. Together they approached the west wing, the silence thick and expectant. The door stood before them, sturdy and unyielding. Whimsy produced the key and turned it in the lock. The mechanism yielded with a quiet click, and the door swung open to reveal a dimly lit study, walls lined with books and papers strewn across a heavy oak desk. Whimsy's eyes immediately caught on a conspicuous bundle tied with crimson ribbon resting atop the desk. Untying it, he revealed a series of documents. Legal contracts, handwritten notes, and a recent will superseding the prior arrangement. "Look here," Whimsy said, pointing to a clause stipulating that Henry Armitage's estate would be divided not between his daughter and cousin, but instead would pass entirely to an unnamed beneficiary upon his untimely demise. Who could this beneficiary be? Parker wondered aloud. Evelyn looked pale. "I have no knowledge of any such person." Whimsy pondered for a moment. The existence of a secret beneficiary would certainly provide motive for murder, a motive concealed beneath layers of familial loyalty and social expectation. He turned to Parker. "We must also consider the physical evidence discovered earlier, the misplaced salver, the altered clocks, the broken wristwatch, each an attempt to mislead the investigators and buy time for the true perpetrator." Parker nodded. "But who would gain the most from these deceptions?" Whimsy smiled faintly. "The answer, my dear Parker, lies in the final, overlooked detail, a slip in the carefully constructed facade." He gestured toward the fireplace, where faint marks in the soot suggested recent disturbance. Moving closer, he found beneath the hearth a small hollow space concealed by loose brick. Extracting it, Whimsy revealed a folded letter, its edges worn, but the ink fresh. He unfolded it carefully and read aloud. "The arrangement stands as agreed. Should the matter proceed, the truth must remain buried. The time is near, and I will act to secure what is rightfully mine." The handwriting was unmistakable. "Philip Stanton," Wimsey declared. Evelyn gasped softly. "But that implicates him directly." "Indeed, and it suggests he was more than a mere visitor. He was the architect of the deception." A sudden noise interrupted them, the creak of a floorboard from the corridor outside. Wimsey motioned silently to Parker, and they drew their revolvers, moving cautiously toward the door. Before they could reach it, the door burst open, and Philip Stanton himself stepped inside, a sardonic smile on his lips and a revolver raised. "Surprised to see me, Lord Peter?" Stanton sneered. "I feared you might be closing in." Wimsey's eyes twinkled with undiminished calm. "Mr. Stanton, your timing is impeccable, as always, but I regret to inform you that your game is at an end." Stanton laughed bitterly. "You think you've pieced together my little puzzle. You have no idea what you've stumbled into." "On the contrary," Wimsey replied, voice cold and precise. "Every piece fits perfectly. Your financial desperation, the quarrel with Henry Armitage, the forged alibis, the tampering with timepieces, all to mask a murder calculated to secure an inheritance." Stanton's face twisted with rage. "You'll never prove it." "But I already have." Wimsey gestured to Parker, who stepped forward, signaling the arrival of the local constabulary. "Your confession, Mr. Stanton, delivered in a moment of overconfidence, will suffice for the law." Stanton's eyes flickered with defeat as he lowered the revolver and let himself be taken into custody. As the doors closed behind the arrested man, Wimsey returned to the desk, picking up a cigarette case and lighting a cigar with deliberate elegance. "Parker," he mused, exhaling a thin stream of smoke. "It appears the greatest deception was not merely the murder, but the carefully staged illusion of familial discord." Parker smiled wryly. "And once again, the devil is in the details." Wimsey chuckled softly. "Indeed, my dear fellow. And as always, it is the seemingly trivial minutiae, the soundproof doors, the misaligned clocks, the misplaced salver, that reveal the true nature of human folly." Outside, the dawn broke, scattering the last vestiges of fog from Marbury Lane. Within, the shadows of suspicion had lifted, exposing the cold, unvarnished truth beneath. The arrest of Philip Stanton seemed, on the surface, to bring the mystery of Marbury House to a neat conclusion, yet Lord Peter Wimsey was not one to be satisfied with surface appearances. The following morning, the atmosphere in the great hall was subdued, almost brittle, as if the house itself was uncertain whether to sigh in relief or brace for another tremor. Wimsey, ever the keen observer, noted how the gathered family and servants exchanged furtive glances, their polite chatter strained and halting. Parker appeared at Wimsey's elbow, holding a small folded note he had discovered pinned beneath the fireplace tools in the drawing-room. "Found this, my lord. It's addressed to you." Wimsey took the note, his fingers unfolding the thin paper with deliberate care. The handwriting was unfamiliar, precise, and carried a certain elegance that suggested education and confidence. The message read, "Lord Peter, if you believe you have unraveled the entire truth, you are mistaken. The final act remains concealed behind the curtain of appearances. Come to the chapel at midnight if you wish to see what lies beneath the surface. A friend." The cryptic nature of the note sent a thrill through Wimsey's veins, the promise of a final revelation tempting his innate curiosity and professional pride. "Quite the theatrical invitation," he remarked dryly. "One might think this was penned by an amateur playwright, yet there is a gravity to it that cannot be ignored." "That chapel has been the source of more mysteries than one might care to admit," Parker observed. "Shall we attend, my lord?" Wimsey nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Indeed, the game is far from over. That evening, as the house settled into an uneasy quiet, Wimsey and Parker made their way to the chapel, the flicker of candlelight barely penetrating the thick darkness. The air was heavy with the scent of damp stone and old incense, lending the space an almost sacred solemnity. Yet the shadows seemed to dance with a restless energy, as if anticipating the drama about to unfold. Whimsy's keen eyes scanned the chapel, noting the subtle irregularities. A stone flag slightly raised, a tapestry skewed out of alignment. Observe, Parker, how the environment itself conspires to conceal. It is a physical manifestation of the lies woven within this household. A sudden creak echoed through the silence, and from behind the altar stepped Evelyn Armitage, her face pale but resolute. "Lord Peter," she whispered, "there is one more truth you must hear, one that has remained buried beneath layers of fear and duty." Whimsy gestured for her to continue. Evelyn took a breath, steadying herself. The inheritance dispute was but a symptom. The true cause of Henry's murder lies in a secret he carried, one I was sworn never to reveal. She paused, then in a low voice confided, "My father was not the man we believed. Years ago, he was involved in a scandal, one that threatened to ruin another family. To protect them, he assumed a false identity and fled. The man we called Henry Armitage was, in fact, someone else, an interloper who took the place of the real Henry." Whimsy's eyebrows rose, a remarkable revelation. And who might the true Henry Armitage be, then? Evelyn's eyes glistened with tears. Philip Stanton. He was the rightful heir, wronged and replaced. The documents you found, the altered will, they were part of a desperate attempt to erase his claim. So Philip's return was not merely a visit, but a reclamation, Whimsy murmured. A reclaiming of identity and property, marred by resentment and the shadow of usurpation. The weight of the confession settled over the chapel like a dense fog. Whimsy's mind raced, piecing together the implications, the motives entwined with stolen identity, the lengths to which a man would go to safeguard a fabricated life, and the tragedy that such duplicity wrought. "But why murder?" Parker asked. "If the truth was so deeply hidden, why resort to such extremes?" "Because secrets," Whimsy replied, "are both weapons and prisons. The discovery of the truth would unravel not only lives, but legacies. Desperation breeds cruelty, especially when one's existence is a carefully balanced illusion." As the clock in the village tolled midnight, the silence of the chapel was broken by footsteps approaching from the shadows. A figure emerged, none other than Geoffrey Armitage, the cousin whose quiet demeanor had masked a turbulent soul. Whimsy's gaze sharpened. "Mr. Armitage, your presence here at this hour is most intriguing." Geoffrey met his stare steadily. "I wish to confess, Lord Peter, the burden of silence has become unbearable." He stepped forward, voice low but unwavering. "I discovered the truth about Philip years ago and swore myself to secrecy, hoping to protect the family's name. But when Philip returned, I feared the scandal would destroy us all. In a moment of weakness, I confronted Henry, and in the ensuing struggle, events spiraled beyond my control." A collective gasp seemed to ripple through the chapel. Evelyn covered her mouth, trembling. Whimsy inclined his head gravely. "A confession worthy of the greatest tragedians, yet it is the precise clarity we require." He turned to Parker. "Notify the constables. Mr. Armitage's candid admission will bring the final chapter to a close." As Geoffrey was escorted away, Whimsy allowed himself a brief smile of satisfaction. The intricate web had been unraveled, not through brute force or fanciful speculation, but by patient deduction, keen observation, and an unwavering commitment to truth. Stepping out into the cool night air, Whimsy inhaled deeply, the scent of damp earth and cedar promising the dawn of resolution. "To think," he murmured to Parker, "that beneath the veneer of civility lies such a labyrinth of human frailty and fortitude. Marbury Lane will be spoken of for many years, not merely for the crime, but for the unmasking of the many faces we wear." Parker chuckled softly. "And for the master who untangles it all with a cigar and a wry smile." Whimsy chuckled in return. "Quite so, my good man. Now let us return. The morning demands its coffee, and perhaps a fresh puzzle to tease our wits." Together they walked back toward the house, the first rays of sunlight piercing the horizon, dispelling shadows and illuminating the enduring complexity of the human heart. The morning light spilled over the manicured lawns of Marbury House with deceptive serenity, as if nature itself had conspired to wash away the sins and secrets that clung stubbornly to the ancient stone. Yet inside the drawing room, the air was thick with a different kind of tension, quiet, expectant, like the moment before the final act of a carefully composed play. Lord Peter Wimsey sat in his accustomed chair, the faint curl of smoke from his cigar drifting upwards in lazy spirals. His sharp eyes, however, betrayed no relaxation. They were alert, missing nothing. Parker stood nearby, straight-backed and efficient as ever, awaiting instructions. The constables had taken Geoffrey Armitage into custody after his confession in the chapel, and the household was now grappling with the tumult of truths revealed and trust irrevocably shattered. Yet Wimsey knew this was but the surface. The tangled web of identities, lies, and loyalties demanded one last, precise stroke to complete the picture. "Parker," Wimsey began, voice low and measured, "the documents we uncovered, especially the forged will and the letters purporting to be from the true Henry, have been examined closely by the experts. But one question remains. How did the forgery evade detection for so long, and what was the precise mechanism by which it was introduced into the family archives?" Parker nodded thoughtfully. "The forger must have had unrestricted access, my lord. I imagine the person responsible was either the most trusted or the most invisible, one or the other." Wimsey's lips curled into a faint, sardonic smile. "Precisely. And invisibility is often the privilege of those closest to the hearth, yet least suspected by the family. The servants, the unnoticed, the silent watchers. We must turn our gaze there once more." With that, they summoned Mrs. Draper, the housekeeper, who had managed Marbury House with an iron will and discreet efficiency for nearly 2 decades. Her expression was guarded, her posture impeccable. "Mrs. Draper," Wimsey began, "you have served this family loyally. Yet loyalty, as you well know, can be a veil for many things. May I ask you, who had the most frequent and unobserved access to the family papers and private correspondence?" The housekeeper hesitated a fraction, the faintest flicker of unease crossing her otherwise composed features. "The young footman, sir. James. Quiet, diligent, keeps to himself mostly, but he is trusted implicitly by Master Henry." "Ah," said Wimsey softly. "And where is James at present?" "Confined to his quarters, sir, since the murder. The police thought it prudent." A discreet summons brought James forward, a slender youth with a pale, almost fragile demeanor. His eyes darted nervously, but he met Wimsey's gaze steadily. "James," Wimsey said kindly but firmly, "you may believe yourself overlooked, but sometimes it is those who watch and wait in silence who hold the most telling truths. Can you explain how certain documents bearing the victim's signature came to be altered without detection?" James swallowed hard. I don't know, sir. I only carried the letters and papers as instructed. I was never asked to forge or change anything. Yet someone must have had the means and the motive," Wimsey murmured, "and the opportunity to manipulate those documents within the confines of the house." James's eyes filled with tears. "I swear, sir, I didn't do it. But I saw Miss Evelyn going into the library late one evening, the night before Master Henry was found." Wimsey exchanged a glance with Parker. Evelyn's recent confession and Geoffrey's admission had explained much, but here was another layer, a fresh wrinkle in the fabric. "Tell me exactly what you saw," Wimsey urged gently. "She carried a small bundle of papers, sir, and she looked frightened, almost desperate. I thought to speak with her, but she hurried past without noticing me. The detective's mind raced. Evelyn's concealment of her father's true identity and Geoffrey's violent act had cast shadows over the household. Now, Evelyn's furtive actions suggested there was yet another secret buried in the paper trail. Wimsey decided to inspect the library once more, this time with renewed scrutiny. The room was lined with towering shelves, each sagging under the weight of leather-bound volumes and forgotten tomes. The heavy curtains were drawn, and the scent of old parchment lingered. His fingers traced the spines of books until he found the hidden compartment behind a row of encyclopedias, a clever mechanism that had escaped his attention before. Inside lay a stack of letters, some forged, some authentic, and beneath them a small leather-bound journal. The journal belonged to the original Henry Armitage, the man who had vanished years ago, whose identity had been stolen. Wimsey leafed through the faded pages, each entry painstakingly penned with a mixture of fear and hope. Here was the true motive behind the tangled deceptions. Henry had discovered evidence implicating a powerful local family in illicit dealings, smuggling, bribery, and worse. His flight had been a desperate attempt to protect his loved ones and to gather proof that might one day restore justice. Suddenly, a name caught Wimsey's eye. J. Armitage. The initials were faintly scratched at the bottom of a torn page. Parker, Wimsey said, there is one more player we have overlooked. Parker arched an eyebrow. The man known only as James, the footman, is, in fact, James Armitage, Henry's younger brother, presumed lost to the world, but alive and here, under our noses. The revelation hit Parker like a thunderclap. A family divided by secrets and shadows, my lord. Wimsey nodded. And this James, torn between loyalty to blood and duty to the household, has played a far more complicated role than we imagined. We must find him. A search of the servant quarters revealed James Armitage packing a small bag, his face pale but resolute. You should not flee, Wimsey said gently. There is more to your story than mere escape. Come, sit with me and tell the truth. James's story spilled forth. How he had returned in secret, hoping to uncover the truth about his brother's disappearance. How he had tried to protect the family by concealing certain documents, and how, in his fear, he had inadvertently allowed the forgery to proceed. I never wished harm, he said, voice breaking, only to keep what little family I have left safe. Wimsey regarded him thoughtfully. A noble aim, but one that has wrought terrible consequences. As the pieces finally clicked into place, the detective called for the assembled family and staff. The drawing room, once a stage for whispered lies, now became the arena for truth. With impeccable logic and unyielding calm, Wimsey recounted the entire sequence. The stolen identity, the secret journal, the forged will, the violent confrontation, and the hidden presence of James Armitage. The brother returned from shadows to expose the fragile threads holding the family's fabric together. The assembled group listened in stunned silence, some faces paling, others hardening in bitter acceptance. When Wimsey finished, he allowed himself a rare smile. Justice, as you see, is seldom a simple matter of guilt or innocence. It is a tapestry woven from human frailty, courage, and the eternal pursuit of truth. The local magistrate nodded solemnly as he prepared to take charge of the legal proceedings. While the household began to breathe once more, the weight of secrets lifted at last. As the day faded into evening, Wimsey stood once more by the window, cigar in hand, gazing at the calm horizon beyond Marbury Lane. Parker, he said quietly. Another mystery resolved, and yet the enigma of human nature remains infinitely complex. Parker smiled. And thank heavens for that, my lord. It keeps the mind sharp and the spirit lively. Wimsey chuckled softly, the embers of his cigar glowing faintly in the dusk. Indeed, for without mysteries, What would become of men like us? And with that, the house at Marbury Lane finally exhaled. Its dark chapters closed, its secrets revealed, all thanks to the sharp mind and dry wit of Lord Peter Wimsey. The heavy curtains of Marbury House swayed gently as the evening breeze filtered through, carrying away the last remnants of a day thick with revelations. Lord Peter Wimsey sat quietly in the drawing-room, his fingers tapping thoughtfully on the arm of his chair. The puzzle, long tangled with deceit and shadowed loyalties, was finally undone. Yet beneath the surface of resolution, the true measure of the case remained. Human nature, as inscrutable as ever. The final gathering of the household was a somber affair. Evelyn's pale face held a fragile composure, while Geoffrey's shoulders sagged beneath the weight of his confession and remorse. James Armitage, the once overlooked footman revealed to be the missing brother, stood with a steady gaze, his presence a living testament to the tangled threads of family and fate. Wimsey rose and addressed them all, his voice calm but firm. The tragedy that befell Henry Armitage was born not simply of greed or betrayal, but of fear and silence. The forged will, the hidden letters, and the desperate concealments were each attempts to protect or to control, but they only served to entangle us further in darkness. He paused, letting the words settle. Justice, in this case, is not measured solely by punishment, but by the truth that must be faced. Geoffrey's act, though violent, was born of a desperate need to shield his family from ruin. Evelyn's secret guarded a painful legacy, and James, though silent, sought to preserve what remained of his brother's name. Turning to the magistrate, Wimsey added, "It is for the law to weigh the consequences now, but it is the understanding between us that will heal the wounds left behind." As the crowd dispersed, Parker approached Wimsey, his expression reflecting relief and admiration. "A masterful unraveling, my lord. The tangled threads have been drawn tight, leaving nothing loose to unravel further." Wimsey allowed himself a faint smile. The familiar spark in his eyes rekindled. "Indeed, Parker, in every mystery there is a human heart at its center, frail, complex, and ultimately seeking redemption." Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over Marbury Lane. The house, once a prison of secrets, now stood quiet and dignified, its shadows lifted by the light of truth. Lord Peter Wimsey took one last drag of his cigar, crushed it thoughtfully, and exhaled with satisfaction. The case was closed. Justice, in all its imperfect grace, had been served.